Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions. It started with a click. Not from a phone or a camera, but from the microphone switching on. Marla hadn't warned me she was going to speak that night. Then again, she didn't warn me about much anymore. I was halfway through a plate of cold risotto, already fighting a tension headache from the noise, when her voice echoed across the ballroom speakers. Hi everyone. I just want to take a quick moment to thank my team, my boss, and of course, my incredibly patient fiancé, Curtis, the man who somehow survives living with me and my chaos. I mean, let's be honest, he's basically a human white noise machine. Always there, always humming in the background, never interrupting. Laughter. Not polite chuckles, real laughter. Deep, belly-level howling from a crowd that didn't even know me. Someone at the next table muttered, "Ouch," and took a sip of champagne. I sat frozen. My name, my relationship, my dignity, all served as the night's punchline. What came next was worse. Marla didn't stop. She launched into this bizarre roast-style tribute where she rattled off fun facts about me, like how I once got nervous parallel parking during her driving test, or how I still use a paper planner. And then, "I swear I'm not making this up," she said, "Curtis is proof you can still land a woman way out of your league if you just stay quiet and look confused enough." The laughter hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken in my life. People stared, some with sympathy, most with amusement. I felt my throat tighten. My palms were damp. My heart didn't pound, it shrank. I don't remember standing up. I just remember the silence that followed. The music hadn't even restarted yet. I stepped onto the stage while she was still holding the mic, leaned in, and whispered, "You made your point." Then I turned to the crowd, nodded, and said into her mic, "That was my fiancé." Past tense. Gasps. Audible gasps. I handed her the ring. Not tossed. Not thrown. Just gently placed it into her stunned palm. Then I walked out, leaving nothing but an empty chair and an unforgettable silence. What no one knew, what Marla didn't know, was that this wasn't just me having a moment. This was just the beginning. The moment I stepped outside that banquet hall, the air hit me like ice. It wasn't even cold, but my body felt like it had just walked out of a burning building. I didn't storm out. There was no dramatic exit. Just that calm, surreal kind of walk you take when you're too numb to cry, too hurt to speak, and too exhausted to go home. I walked down the block without a clue where I was headed. My phone vibrated once, then again, then again. I didn't look. I didn't want to see her name. Not yet. Not after that. Inside, she had a room full of people who laughed with her. But out here, it was just me. Just Curtis, the human white noise machine, wandering past street lamps and cracked sidewalks with nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat. The ring was gone. I had handed it to her in front of at least 200 people. I hadn't rehearsed it, hadn't planned anything. But it was like something inside me, something buried for years, finally pulled the emergency brake. What really messed me up was realizing that no one had stopped her. Not one coworker had looked uncomfortable. Not one person had pulled her aside afterward to say, "Hey, maybe roasting your fiancé like a frat boy wasn't the move." That meant either they didn't care or worse, they thought it was normal, which told me more about her life than I ever wanted to know. I ended up sitting on a curb outside a closed coffee shop. I watched people pass by in coats and heels, none of them knowing they were walking past the ruins of someone's future. A guy leaned out of a rideshare car and asked if I was okay. I just nodded. Didn't want to explain why my life had exploded next to a recycling bin. Eventually, I checked my phone. 12 missed calls, 19 texts, a voice memo. The latest message read, "I can't believe you embarrassed me like that. We need to talk. Call me now." She said I embarrassed her, after what she said into a microphone. And that right there told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a bad joke. It was who she was, and who I had let her become in our relationship. The woman who once kissed my forehead when I was panicking about job interviews was now mocking my anxiety in front of strangers. And I had let it happen for far too long. I didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next day either. I didn't go home. I booked a cheap hotel 2 towns over. No suitcase. Just my phone charger and the crumpled program from the banquet still in my pocket. That night, I laid on a lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling fan. And I whispered to myself, Curtis, what if this is your second chance? Not your downfall? When I woke up in that dim motel room, for a moment I didn't remember where I was. The thin curtains let in just enough gray daylight to blur everything. The scratchy sheets smelled like bleach. My phone was dead. It was the first time in months I'd slept through a night without Marla's voice telling me I was too restless, too loud, or breathing like I was in labor. Yeah, she actually said that once. It wasn't until I sat up and saw my wrinkled slacks crumpled on the chair, next to the flour-crushed banquet program, that the memories snapped back like a slap to the face. The mic, the jokes, the ring, my feet on the stage, the silence in the room when I walked away. I plugged in my phone, half hoping it had exploded overnight. It lit up, sluggishly. 51 unread messages. 7 voicemails. The first new notification was a tag from her on social media. She had posted a black and white photo of her holding the ring in her palm, captioned, "Love is complicated. Some stories end before they're told." The comments were already filled with people saying things like, "Stay strong, Queen," and "You deserve better." One person even wrote, "He never looked like he matched your energy anyway." I felt sick. It was like being erased and blamed for the erasure all in one click. Before I could close the app, my screen lit up again. Incoming call. It was her. I let it ring, then again, and again. By the 5th time, I picked up, but I didn't say a word. She spoke first. Her voice was cold, tight, like someone who was rehearsing lines. "Curtis, if you're trying to make a scene, congratulations. You succeeded. But we need to handle this like adults. People at the office are asking questions. You embarrassed me in front of clients. You can't just walk off and act like the victim." The victim. I still didn't speak. Just listened as she went on about how her reputation was on the line, how every couple teases each other, and how I was being overly sensitive again. Then she said something I'll never forget. "If you want closure, come home and talk. But if you're just going to sulk in a cheap motel, don't expect me to chase you." I finally spoke. "You already chased me off the stage." Then I hung up. I stared at the screen for a long time. No tears, just this creeping clarity. For 2 years, I'd been told I was too quiet, too cautious, too soft. I stopped talking about my day because she made fun of how boring it sounded. I stopped cooking because she said my meals were too beige. I stopped laughing because she always asked what was so funny. And now, she wanted closure without admitting the damage. I called in sick to work. I didn't lie. I just told my boss, "I had to walk away from something big last night, and I don't know who I am this morning." He didn't ask more. I appreciated that. I spent the day walking aimlessly. No headphones. No distractions. Just walking and remembering all the small humiliations that had piled up. The little stabs dressed as sarcasm, the fake smiles in front of her friends, the constant lowering of my own voice just to keep the peace. By sunset, I wasn't just angry. I was awake. I hadn't planned on seeing her again. Not so soon. But by the 4th day, after ignoring every one of her calls and watching her spin our breakup into some cryptic, he ghosted me narrative online. I realized I needed something more than distance. I needed answers. Or maybe I just needed to hear her lie one last time so I could stop wondering if I imagined all of it. I went back to the house on a Tuesday morning. I still had the spare key, though I stood there for a good 5 minutes before using it. I half hoped she wouldn't be home. But of course she was. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not bad, just off. Like someone had tried to cover up tension with lavender. Her heels were still scattered near the door. A half-full wine glass on the counter. She hadn't cleaned up. Not even a little. She came out of the hallway wearing one of those oversized sweaters she used to say made her feel cozy and small. It used to make my heart melt. This time, I just saw a woman trying to look harmless. "Oh," she said, like she hadn't spent the last 3 days demanding I return. "You actually came." I closed the door behind me, but I didn't take off my shoes. She gestured toward the kitchen. Do you want coffee, or are we just doing this with passive-aggressive silence? Still trying to control the tone. I walked past her and stood by the living room window. That's where she used to sit when she scrolled through social media, tagging me in inspirational relationship quotes while quietly ignoring me for hours. I finally said, I didn't come to rehash things. She crossed her arms. Then what? You came to make a speech like you did at the banquet? There it was. The jab. The real her. No, I replied calmly. I came to say thank you. That threw her. Thank you for showing everyone, not just me, exactly who you are when a microphone's in your hand. You saved me years of pretending. Her eyes narrowed. You think one joke ruined us? No, I said. But it reminded me that I've been the joke for a long time. She started pacing. You're twisting this. That night was about me. It was supposed to be my celebration. You hijacked it because you're emotionally fragile. I let out the smallest laugh. Not mocking. Just hollow. That's the word you always use. Fragile. Like it's shameful to care. Like silence is weakness. Like your idea of strength is publicly humiliating your partner to get a few laughs. She went quiet. I walked to the bookshelf, the one where she used to display all the books she'd never read. There was a photo of us at my sister's wedding. She looked radiant. I looked like I was hoping someone would tell me I mattered. I picked it up, looked at it for a second, then set it face down. You don't get to rewrite this, I told her. You don't get to turn this into a story where I ran away because I was sensitive. I walked away because I finally listened to what you've been saying for months. Even if you called it jokes. She didn't stop me when I walked out. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. And that's how I knew. She never actually thought I would leave. Not really. Leaving her house should have felt like the closing of a door. But in reality, it was like tearing off a scab. All rawness and stinging air. I didn't go back to the motel this time. I stayed with my cousin Owen, who lived 40 minutes away and had one of those apartments that always smelled like burnt toast and old books. He didn't ask a lot of questions when I showed up with an overnight bag and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep since the 8th grade. You look like you got hit by a car made of emotions, he said, tossing me a pillow. I'll clear the couch. That night, I slept better than I had in months. But things started spiraling fast the next day. It began with a phone call from Marla's sister, Camille, someone I used to think of as family. Her tone was sharp, cold, like I had ruined her wedding. She said she didn't understand why I had to humiliate Marla in public, and that people joke about their partners all the time. When I asked if Camille would be okay with her fiancé calling her a background prop in front of a ballroom full of strangers, she replied, "It was just a roast. You overreacted." Overreacted. That word followed me all day. Friends texted me in clumps, some cautiously supportive, others weirdly neutral, like they didn't want to take sides in a political debate. My own mother, bless her, sent a voice message that started with, "I don't know what happened, honey, but maybe you should apologize just to ease the tension." Apologize? For what? Finally noticing how invisible I'd become. By noon, Marla had posted a story on her social feed. A sad selfie, eyes red, captioned, "People think they know your relationship. They don't see the silent wars behind closed doors." I laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, but because it was the most accurate thing she'd ever said, except she made it sound like she had been the one suffering in silence. I thought about replying. I really did. I thought about posting a counterstory, sharing screenshots, even writing a long, impassioned thread explaining what really went down. But something stopped me. Maybe for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to defend myself in front of an audience that was never rooting for me in the first place. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Natalie, my ex before Marla. We'd ended things on good terms years back and hadn't spoken since. But she picked up after one ring. I didn't unload everything, just said I needed to talk to someone who remembered me before I became whatever shell I'd been with Marla. She said something that stuck. "You always gave people more patience than they deserved, Curtis, but you never gave yourself any." After we hung up, I sat on Owen's couch, holding my phone like it had just told me a prophecy. That evening, Marla emailed me a document, a drafted statement she wanted me to post jointly, so we could control the narrative. It was full of polished nonsense about how we had grown apart and how we were grateful for the memories. I stared at the blinking cursor for 20 minutes. Then I wrote back 2 words, "Post your truth." She never replied. It was a Thursday evening when I made my first mistake in weeks. I picked up when I shouldn't have. The number was unknown, but I answered anyway, thinking maybe it was my boss or a friend reaching out with something simple, something ordinary. But it was her. "Marla, don't hang up," she said quickly. "This isn't about blame or drama. I just want to talk." I didn't say anything at first, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't trust my voice not to break in all the wrong ways. Then she added something that caught me off guard. "My dad's in town. He wants to have dinner with us. He doesn't know what happened yet." I almost laughed. "Us? Marla, there is no us." I know," she said. "I just haven't told him yet. He's old-fashioned. He'll want answers. Please, just one dinner. Then you never have to talk to me again." Now here's the thing. Her dad, Paul, had always liked me. Genuinely. He was one of the few people who saw me, not as some accessory to Marla's career, but as a real person. And deep down, I guess I felt like I owed him honesty. So I said yes. I regret it almost immediately. The restaurant she chose was one of those candlelit, modern places with portions the size of baby fists and waiters who looked like retired models. I wore a dark button-down that barely fit anymore. She wore black. She always wore black when she wanted to look serious. Paul smiled when he saw me. He clapped my shoulder, shook my hand too tightly, told me I looked thinner, which wasn't a compliment. It was observation laced with concern. He was already suspicious. The first 15 minutes were surface-level work, weather, wine lists. Marla did most of the talking, guiding the conversation like a pilot refusing to acknowledge turbulence. But Paul wasn't stupid. Eventually, he asked, "So, when's the date?" Silence. Marla cleared her throat. "Dad, we hit a rough patch." He turned to me. "That true?" I looked at her, then back at him. "No, sir. We didn't hit a rough patch. We hit a wall, and she threw me at it." Her face turned pale. Paul leaned back slowly, eyes narrowed. I didn't hold back. I told him everything. Not the ugly, petty stuff, but the real parts. The public humiliation. The jokes dressed as daggers. The slow erosion of respect. I told him how I didn't walk away from love. I walked away from being disposable. Marla didn't interrupt. She just sat there, folding the edge of her napkin over and over, as if undoing the moment piece by piece. Paul looked disappointed, but not in me. "I raised you to speak your mind, Marla," he said, shaking his head. "Not to sharpen it and aim it at the people who care about you." She blinked fast, like she was trying not to cry, but no tears came. After dinner, she followed me out. No coat, no plan, just desperation. "You didn't have to say all that," she muttered. "Yes, I did," I replied, "because I spent 2 years protecting your image while you chipped away at mine." She stared at me for a long time before whispering, "Do you hate me?" I paused. Not for effect, just because I honestly didn't know. "No," I said, "but I stopped loving you the moment I realized you loved the spotlight more than you loved me." And I walked away, again. But this time it felt like the last time. You always assume the hardest part is leaving. It's not. The hardest part is the nothing that follows. Not the drama, not the arguments, but the stillness, the quiet apartment, the unread messages, the people who once had so much to say falling completely silent once the spectacle ends. I spent the next few weeks in that void. Owen let me crash as long as I needed. I eventually got off his couch, started going back to work, even had lunch with a few coworkers who noticed I was no longer walking around like a ghost. On the outside, it looked like I was adjusting. But inside, I was stuck in replay. I kept hearing her voice on that microphone, kept remembering the way people laughed, the way I smiled through it like I always did. One night, out of sheer impulse, I opened an email I'd left unread. It was from Marla's coworker, Elena. We'd spoken a few times at events. She always seemed polite, professional, distant. But the subject line read, "I should have said something sooner." The email wasn't long, but it hit harder than I expected. "Curtis, you don't know me well, but I want you to know what happened at the banquet wasn't okay. Most people laughed because they were uncomfortable, not because they agreed. A few of us talked about it afterward, but no one had the courage to call her out. Not publicly. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. You seemed like someone who cared deeply, and I hope you're surrounded by people who see that now." It wasn't an apology from Marla, but strangely it meant more. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I realized how starved I had been for basic acknowledgement. Not validation. Just someone else saying, "Yeah, that was cruel." The next day, I walked past a little bookstore on my lunch break. It was the kind of place Marla always mocked. Called it a dust trap for sad people with too many feelings. I went inside anyway. There was a poetry reading happening in the back. I almost walked out, but something made me stay. I stood there awkwardly in the back, listening to strangers bare their hearts over microphones. And then it hit me, they weren't afraid of being too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too quiet. They didn't perform strength. They shared the ache. And I realized Marla had never really hurt me with just one speech. She had built a cage out of shame, brick by brick. Every time she rolled her eyes at my anxieties. Every time she sighed when I spoke slowly. Every time she told me to toughen up instead of listening. And I had helped build that cage by trying to make myself smaller, more palatable, more normal. That night, I pulled out my old journal. I hadn't written in it in years, not since before her. I stared at the empty page for a while. Then I wrote one line. "I'm not the background noise. I was always the melody." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't poetic. But it was mine. And for the first time, I didn't care if it made sense to anyone else. 6 weeks after that banquet, I stood in front of a mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different. I still had the same uneven haircut, the same faded hoodie. But something in my eyes had changed. There was still exhaustion, yes, but behind it, there was clarity. I wasn't spinning anymore. I was grounded. Alone but not lonely. I didn't check her social media anymore. I didn't replay her words in my head. I didn't try to rewrite the past or explain it away. Some things don't need a better ending. They just need to end. One afternoon, Owen came home from work and tossed a key at me. "It's yours," he said. "Spare rooms cleared out. You've earned walls that are your own." I didn't cry, but I felt something loosen in my chest, like I was finally breathing without bracing. That weekend, I took a walk downtown and stumbled across a small art exhibit. I'm not an art guy, I used to pretend to be because Marla was, but that day I walked in on a whim. No reason, no performance, just me. In the corner of the room was a painting. Not big, not flashy. Just a quiet landscape. A trail in the woods, half sunlit, half shadowed. The artist had titled it "Still Here." I stood in front of it for a long time. Not because it reminded me of anything, but because it didn't. It was just peaceful, honest. I bought it. My first real purchase since leaving. A week later, I hung it up in my new room, above my desk, where my journal now sat open every day. Not because I was writing masterpieces, but because I was finally letting my thoughts exist without judgment. I don't hate Marla. I don't wish her harm. I genuinely hope she figures out what part of her needed to laugh at someone else just to feel seen. But I also hope she never gets another chance to do that to someone again. As for me, I've stopped trying to be likable, or chill, or the quiet guy in the corner. I'm still quiet, but now it's by choice, not submission. I don't need a spotlight. I just refuse to be a prop in someone else's. And maybe that's the real win. Thank you for watching this story on Reddit Confessions. If Curtis's journey reminded you of a moment where you finally stood up for yourself, even if your voice shook, share it in the comments. What moment from this story hit you the hardest? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. More stories are coming your way, only here on Reddit Confessions.